Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak on Citizen Television. Thank you for staying with us here on the broadcast. Towards the tail end of this broadcast, we'll sample your feedback. The hashtag on Twitter is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya, and at Ayub Abdikadir. With me in the studio is Wanja Maina, who is a youth and one of the concerned Kenyans as to what's happening to the young people in the country. Sylvia Mulama is also a commentator on youth affairs. She falls within that bracket. Bilian Ojiwa is an activist, and with me in studio, as well as Kidi Mwaga, who is a lawyer and falls within the bracket of those making between 18 and 34 and account for 11,809,518, coming against the backdrop of the appointments by the state and the feeling of marginalization by the young people in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Morning.
Welcome and thanks for making time. May I begin with you, Bilian, at the center. What's your account of what's happening in the country and what's happening to the young people?
Thank you for having me. My name is Bilian, and I'm a politician too. I ran for Mathare parliamentary seat under the UDA ticket. And for me, I think with the new government in place, there's a lot of shake-up that is happening within the systems, and young people trying to find the grip of the new government. So I am still hopeful that, the best will happen. But, the shake-up and the young people trying to find the bearing, it's what is happening at the moment. Okay. Yeah.
Are your expectations met? Were your expectations met in terms of the young people in general?
Yes, I totally believe in this government. I believed in this government before election. And my expectations, because I've had conversations around young people with the current president when he was still the deputy president, and the vision, the mission that he has for young people in this country, I believe with time we'll get to see the fruit. So I totally believe that, there's so much on the way, and yeah, so should be all young people.
Okay, and we'll talk about the charter by the president that he has with the young people in the country. Wanja Maina, I mean, there's always the decry about the feeling of marginalization, no access to opportunities, representation, and taking part in some of these policy-making processes. But what needs to be done for a stoppage of this decry, which is now habitually becoming a perpetual issue?
Okay, first, good morning, Kenya, and thank you very much. I think I'll start by saying that political goodwill is a good place to start, that sometimes the buck really stops with the people who hold power and the people who have ability to make decisions. So, for example, when we see some of the positions and we see former governors, around 8 of them or 10 of them, competing with the jobs that even UDA parliamentarians have said that these positions are meant for young people who are nurturing themselves into leadership, that is quite telling. So I see what can be done as political goodwill, as a lot of deliberate efforts, a lot of affirmative action within affirmative action, even by the, by the people who really hold power. So really, for me, goodwill is the beginning point. Political goodwill, a lot of affirmative action, and a lot of express. Sometimes what we see really on media is quite telling. For example, let's talk about the topic that is currently in everybody's mouth, the issue of CASs.
Okay.
The moment you see young people, I know of a young person who is 22, competing with a person who was a governor, honestly, it's quite telling, because you wonder what are really the parameters. So who is really deserving? So goodwill is a good place to start here.
Okay, and we are now joined by Kidi Mwaga, who is a lawyer. Kidi, good morning.
Good morning.
Your time is appreciated. Thanks for making time for the broadcast. Sylvia, may I take your account?
Yes.
Given that when you look at the numbers in terms of the provisions made by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, all these complaints by young people comes at a time when there is a growth in the number of young people still. But you talk about unemployment, still they are casualty. You talk about access to opportunities, still they are not satisfactorily met in terms of what young people want in the country. But is there the hidden ear of those in policy decision processes? And will this problem be once and for all addressed?
Yes, thank you for having me this morning, Abdikadir. The youth is a fundamental question for discussion. It is not just what we apply on a daily basis, which is the youth, the unemployed youth, but we also have the youth in rural areas and in, of course, the marginalized areas that are living appalling conditions. And I would like to highlight one of the cases of last weekend where His Excellency Musalia Mudavadi happened to attend a conference. And in the conference, there was a young lady, 25 years old, with 3 children, her first child being 12 years old. That is the problem with the youth we're talking about. So you start from there and you start to ask yourself, where did it all go wrong? Because we have not taken a priority as a country to take care of absorbing our youth into meaningful employment or meaningful businesses or trade. We have not taken it seriously to give them enough resources in terms of skills to develop themselves and finances in order to be able to start their own enterprises. And we have not taken time to train them in the different facets of life. The mentorship that used to happen years ago doesn't happen anymore. So there's sort of a gap between the general public and the youth, as it were. And then there's a disconnect between the youth themselves. There's a disconnect between the youth in the university. There's a disconnect between them and those ones who are marginalized and those who are still struggling and uneducated. So it is a question that really needs a lot of attention, how we are going to pull it all together, make something cohesive out of it so that we can achieve. And I believe that the government is actually setting up an agenda for that, to make sure that, we take care of this 75% of our population in this country. Because if we don't take care of them, we are going to have a generation that is going to be dysfunctional. Okay. And as a country will fail. Okay,
Kidi, I come to you because when you talk about the 75%, it's important to circumspect the question on representation alone or taking part in policy-making processes.
Yes.
But otherwise, those who are unemployed and are graduates out of universities, they continue to graduate.
Yes.
Those who are marginalized and in areas and have no education still fall within that bracket. But Kidi, where is the holistic approach to this very persistent problem that has been dotting the country?
Thank you, Ayub. Thank you very much for having me. It is good meeting you again in your current tour of duty. I must first begin by saying that there are 5 needs of a young person. And these 5 needs are education, training, skill set development, employment, and representation. Where we find ourselves today, we are decrying the problem of lack of opportunities for young people. And so it means that young people, as well as many other people within other demographies, are falling behind in regards to the promise of upward social mobility. Mm-hmm. So after, say, a decade of Kibakinomics, and part of the Kibakinomics was that there was increased literacy levels, increased matriculation levels, that is graduation from colleges, or people going to getting high school diplomas, is that then the economy was not producing enough for everyone. So that today, as we speak, we have about 800,000 graduates getting into the job market a year. The economy is only both state sector jobs and private sector are able to only accommodate about 200,000 young people. So it means that we have another 600,000 young people across the Republic who every year have got no guarantee that there will be a job, that they will be able to have an income, that they will be able to take care of themselves, and they will be able to take care of their families. And so in answering your question, yes, that where is the disconnect and how do we plug it? In my view, I think that because politics is a question of who gets what, how, and when, the government has started on the right footing. Okay. And the footing here, in my view, is the Hustler Fund. That for a moment, these 600 people now have a chance to make sure that they can access cheap credit, and the operational word here is cheap credit, and then if they can diligently use that cheap affordable credit and build their credit worthiness, that it may not be a silver bullet, but it is as a first step in the right direction, so that if such efforts can be sustained, making sure that we know that the cap is at 50,000, if we can now begin to open up that cap and get to 100,000 and get to 200,000, I think in a small way, we would be able to say that our young people are living in dignity. Okay. And I want us to look at dignity as an outcome of development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But Kidi, when you mentioned there has been a focus on infrastructure development, yes, that is since 2013.
Yes.
And this is what the Central Bank of Kenya governor did say. And in 2018, just some of the numbers from the Central Bank of Kenya.
Yes.
We had a 6.3% economic growth.
Yes. And
the creation of 762,000 jobs which were created.
Yes.
And this was vis-a-vis that same year, 560,000 students enrolled for universities. That is in the previous year in 2018. Yes. So there seems to be a mismatch. And this is what the Central Bank of Kenya governor said.
Yes.
That it's true, the gross domestic product, GDP numbers are up. But you can't eat GDP, he said. At the end of the day, what's needed is specific income. That's what anybody else wants.
Yes.
And that's what the young people in Kenya want.
Yes.
But they aren't getting it. How will the policymakers address that?
Let me tell you this, Ayub, and you have brought it now out very nicely. Sometimes when we speak about growth in GDP, sometimes we are speaking about growth in existing bottom lines. And sometimes most of those bottom lines does not touch the lives of ordinary young people. For instance, we were in this country when we had the leadership of President Mwai Kibaki. And we were told that the economy was growing at a rate of 7% per year. But you realize that even as the economy was growing, there was also increased poverty. Okay. So that you go to places, a lot of swaths of this country, and people are not feeling that economy. I mean, that economic growth. So I think that, and now this is where I think this government, this administration may be getting it right, and why those efforts must be sustained. That for the first time, you are able to interact with a creditor without necessarily having to say, look for guarantor, because one thing that that guarantor does is that it puts you at the mercy of some other person. So that if young people can diligently build their credit history and credit worthiness, that they are able to have a place where they can get ready money, ready credit, that then they can use to transform their ideas into enterprises, as my sister mentioned earlier. Okay,
Billion, the point there is then you have the Hustler Fund, you have the president who has a charter with the young people will be coming to the specific itemized before the elections when he was the deputy president then. But the young people often understand that there has been a lacking appetite for an address to the problems that have been affecting them. But now you have the Hustler Fund, you have a president who has a charter with the young people in the country. How can they this is in times of crisis, how can they be creative enough to make lemonades out of the lemons provided at the moment in Caveat?
Thank you, Ayub. And I just want to support my brother Kidi. Unfortunately, some of these initiatives have been politicized. If you look at when Hustler Fund was launched, there was a lot of politics around it, and you understand there was a section of politicians who advised their supporters to take the fund but not to repay the fund. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that is misguiding young people, because some of these funds, the way my brother Kidia said, it helps us to build the credit. And as you can now see, there are efforts by the president and different ministries to make sure that now the funds if your credit was 900 shillings, for example, it moves to maybe 5,000 and 3,000. And it was aimed at, supporting some of the initiatives, some of the business at the bottom. And I think that is where we first of all went wrong. And I hope that with such initiatives, I happen to have been part of the team that accompanied CS Owalo when he was launching some of the hotspots across the country. These are some of the initiatives that are able to support, the young people are able to tap into to support themselves, do online jobs. Right now, all the government initiatives, all the government services are digitalized. There's a way that, we can create a lemonade out of this, but we have to, make personal decisions that, we want to create something out of what the government is doing. Because if you look at the numbers, there's so many Kenyans, there's no way that the government will look at all of us and provide or create job opportunities for all of us. So we have to also be innovative enough to create something out of what the initiatives that the government are working on.
Thank you. Wanja Maina, now talking about that initiative, and which Kidi and Billion talk about with a hand on heart, much is pumped in terms of resources, billions of shillings, and this is deliberately targeted at young people and young businesses, of course, operated by young Kenyans. But will enough come out?
First and foremost, there has been, sometimes when a lie or something misleading is repeated so many times, it sounds like a truth. This issue of telling young people to entrepreneur themselves out of poverty does not seem to be scientific, and there's nothing that we can be shown to say that in this country young people entrepreneured themselves out of poverty. Take, for example, the issue of saying that this is a money start small businesses. Okay. But if you look at research and if you look at even business reports, most of small businesses do not go past the first year. Most of them, by the time they are going to the second year, they have already collapsed. So if this issue of entrepreneuring themselves out of poverty is working, how come young people are still decrying out of poverty? Yet even in the past, we've had other funds, the youth fund, other funds and other pilot projects, kazi kwa mtaani, what, young people being given short-term waged contracts to do some jobs. How come they are still talking about poverty? They are still talking about poverty. I think some of these issues need to be looked at from a very informed perspective. Okay. Look at young people, for example. Are they homogeneous? We have young people who are literate, those who are illiterate, those who are women, those who are men. There are a lot of, beyond the statistics, beyond the, here is the 1 billion for you guys, you know you are so entitled, you can't get yourself out of poverty. Beyond that curtain and beyond that generalization, the specifics are, who are these young people? What exactly do they do? And even, let's say, for example, with the fund that you're talking about, the minimum, I think, is 500 shillings. But maybe what 500 shillings could have done for me last year is not what 500 is doing. Actually, it's not even a maybe. It's actually a fact. The cost of the 500 last year and 500 now. So some of these issues, do they even factor issues like the rising cost of living? Do they factor issues like the dynamics of young people? Is it really sustainable to put the pressure on young people to entrepreneur themselves out of poverty? And most young people are saying, as we want waged jobs, we want jobs. So those are some of the issues that are really bringing up the disconnect between the policymakers and the young people. Needless to say, some of these things that are called consultations, that are called, we spoke with the young people have said this and that. Even issues around who are the young people that they are listening to. Because sometimes you go to some of these forums, it is them who are telling the young people. It's a bit up, telling the young people what's good for you. You're entitled, you're lazy, you need to get yourself out of poverty. So I think there is a big need for us to sort of embrace and look at this issue. Thank you. And see,
Yes, Billion. Sylvia,
yes.
Wanja paints a picture of a communication model that is bottom down instead of being bottom up.
Yes.
And that establishes communications to, not with, to have that symbiotic relationship. Is that lacking element? What's the cause of the current problem?
The current problem actually has been building over the years. And I will start with the Ministry of Education from the previous years. When an institution or a set of institutions is creating programs and courses in universities, generic courses, and attracting young people to go for these programs, yet knowing very well that there's no market to absorb them, is misinformed. So our institutions have been operating on, you know, a day-to-day basis, the same thing every day. But I know from last year there's been discussions of matching the training programs within the university according to what's out there in the market. We start there. Then the second thing is also that our education was thawed down into dysfunction. We were training, when 844 system started, it was most about the skills and development. But somehow along the way, it became results-based. And that is where we lost it. And so we trained young people who are probably between now and 35 of knowing nothing else but wearing a suit and going to the office, of not knowing how to be able to do any other skill aside from your formal education. So that was a wrong direction. But now with the CBC into place, if it's given the enough priority and enough support, I think we will change that direction. Then we now come to the current, to the government. Of course, you know, it also depends with the government in sitting. So the current government is in sitting for the past 6 months or so, and they have their own agenda. And when I reflect on the agenda, this is the agenda that now encompasses everybody in this country, from whichever angle you look at it, and particularly the youth, because we've had an economy that only works for the rich, or rather the university educated, but we're not taking care of our unskilled young people, our athletes, our sports personalities, our arts specialists. We've disregarded that into the backyard. So now we have an agenda where all these things are taken into account of.
Okay.
You saw the Minister of Sports launch a whole committee that is going to take care of the arts, take care of sports, and also take care of the youth affairs. Then you have the other side where is now we need to set a base of the economy improvement, which is in agriculture, revive our agriculture, then also revive our manufacturing. Because if we don't have manufacturing, whatever education and skill we are talking about is going to land to cold waters. So the agriculture is one of the priorities. Manufacturing is another priority. Trade, and by trade I mean exporting some of our skilled labor to work in countries we collaborate with, so that we can get some of these young people, education abroad, expose them, they come back to Kenya, they have much more skills, and perhaps, even bringing in more money into the country.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And talking about agriculture and a reorientation of our model, because human resources are a dependent model of billions that is channeled back to the country as remittances from Kenyans who work abroad and in the diaspora. An office for that created, of course, within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But Kidi, Kenya has a pool of a generation that is educated but are unemployed. Yes. You look at more than 4,000 doctors who are unemployed, for instance, and young people, when we talk about unemployment facing young people, then you have another pool of different professionals. You have agriculture, which is supposed to be the backbone of driving this economy. Then in terms of tapping into that, how can the conversation be channeled towards that and a move from the white-collar job and sitting in the office space and rather taking the advantage of the arable land in position of Kenya, of course, within its geography, and change the entire debate over Kenya's economy, make it export-oriented, productivity-led, which will create employment.
Thank you very much. Let me first respond to this notion that when we say that Hustler Fund is a critical first step, that we do not understand what is happening. Because for some time there has been an elite-centric thinking in this country that unless you are given hundreds of thousands of shillings or millions of shillings, that is when you can dig yourself out of poverty. I started by saying that there is dignity as a development outcome. Let me quote, there is a celebrated Indian economist called Amartya Sen, who in his attempt to define development, says that you look at a developed country when that country has got adherence to the rule of law, when, say, there is a predictable criminal justice system, and so now we add things like dignity, so that you don't look at development strictly in terms of, say, brick and mortar. So when we say that Hustler Fund could be a critical first step, especially one because it would help people build credit history. Remember that as we speak, there are about 14,000 Kenyans who are registered with the CRB, listed. The net effect of that listing is that you are unable to get credit. When you are unable to get cheap credit, then it means you cannot get into commerce. So what we are saying is that not that young people can entrepreneur themselves out of poverty, but then there are those people who could get, to whom 1,000 shillings could make the whole difference, whom 3,000 could make a whole difference. And therefore, where is this money? So that availing this money to them is a critical first step to ensure that they are able to live in dignity. Now, let me move to the question. Okay. That therefore, how do we ensure that our young people are able to take advantage of what is available instead of looking at, say, the white-collar jobs? I started by saying that there are 5 critical needs of a young person, and one of them is education, the other one is training. There has been a mismatch somewhere. For instance, when I mentioned that we release 800,000 young people into the economy almost every year, and the formal economy, that is state sector jobs and the private sector, is able to absorb about 200,000. Then we have the other 600,000. One thing we have not done very well in as a country is the area of skill set development as a critical need of young people, so that we realize that you have, say, highly educated populace of, say, young people, but then without skills. Take a young law graduate, for instance, and put him in a law firm. If you do not teach him how to draft a affidavit, how to do planes, how to do all those things, he may be a first-class student, but he may not know much in terms of actual legal practice. So that if, as a country, we are able to find modalities on how we systematically impart skills on our young people, so that as they grow, as they are in high school, you're already learning a skill under the guidance, the tutelage of an apprentice, a mentor. Okay. I think that would go a long way in making sure that we have a young, we are able to turn our demographic dividend, that our young population can actually be a demographic dividend, because you have a young people that is educated, that have got skills, skills that are employable, not only within the country, but anywhere around the globe. Thank you.
When we get back from the break, ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue with the broadcast here and the discussion surrounding young people in the country, talking about the solutions, of course, and going forward, whether the charter that the president had with the young people before he was accorded the mandate on the 9th of August will be implemented or actualized. And some of them, of course, will be taking a look at that, including the Youth Enterprise Fund and the priority in terms of payment of pending bills, in terms of waiver on KRA tax penalties. That's according to the young people, facing young people, of course, for the youth in the country, and having this conversation in the context of an economy matched against the headwinds of hiring freezes and job cuts since the COVID-19 pandemic. The hashtag on Twitter is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. We are back with more after the break. Stay tuned.